Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. It's Brian again. Thank you for joining me. We're going to be getting through a quick update here so that we can see what's going on in Ukraine. And the big news, of course, is St. Petersburg finally got hit with a drone. So let's go ahead and dive right into what happened there and get this whole situation started. It is just a little bit late for me again. I had another busy day today, but again, we're working on that, and as things work out, we'll get a little bit better. All right, so St. Petersburg. Residents of a residential complex in the district of St. Petersburg heard a strong roar, and one of the houses nearby had some glass cracked from the shock wave. A minister from Ukraine confirmed that a target was hit near St. Petersburg with one of Ukraine's homegrown drones. There are also claims that the drone actually flew over Vladimir Putin's Valdai residence. No proof of that, but there is the claim out there. They did manage to point out that this distance right here from Kyiv to St. Petersburg is 1,064 kilometers. From the very border of Ukraine, it's 900 kilometers. But Ukraine itself said that they actually flew that drone exactly according to their words, 1,250 kilometers. The drone did end up impacting on the St. Petersburg oil terminal over there. Some question about exactly what was hit or how bad the damage was. It fell between, according to the Russians here, it fell between a couple of oil storage tanks and caused a fire, but no casualties or significant destruction was carried out. Russia then reported that that was an attempt to attack the seaport with kamikaze drones. With a total of 3, they report having been launched. 2 of them suppressed by electronic warfare and fell into the Gulf of Finland, and another was shot down over the oil terminal. So that's the overall situation right there. Now, why is this important? Well, previous drone attacks have been shorter distances than this. The longest was 700 kilometers to Pskov and Ingalls Air Base as well. And of course, they had been attacking Moscow, which was closer than some of those other distances there. This is the longest reported drone attack that Ukraine has carried out so far, and it's 1,250 kilometers. They also are reporting that they may have some drones around 1,500 kilometers in distance there, but this puts an awful lot of Russia's vital territory in range of Ukraine's attacks. They could hit any strategic target that they can get in that area. So absolutely be paying attention, because we'll probably see more of these drones in the near future. I don't think this was a one-off attack. Now, Bild, that would be the German media source, claimed that drone attacks on Moscow and St. Petersburg could turn Russians against Putin. I'm not so convinced. Again, if we look back at World War II for a similar analog, the people of Germany weren't bombed into submission. They didn't like it, but it wasn't until the actual soldiers showed up that they were able to surrender in the end. The Brits, same thing. When they were bombed, they kept calm and carried on. And I don't think that this aspect alone is enough to overturn the Russian leadership there, specifically Vladimir Putin. Just my personal thought. Now, they do say it could in combination with some other things that are not being affected by Ukraine. The exploding heating systems that they've had across many parts of Russia, the power problems that they've been bumping into the last few days, those things could definitely cause the overturn of the leadership in Russia. But will they? I'd say no, at least not immediately, though there has been some signs of discontent, including some protests that have been pretty well cracked down on. So that's the situation with St. Petersburg. If you're joining me, by the way, please chime in. Let me know you're here so I can acknowledge your messages. I do appreciate you joining me today. Let's go ahead and continue on. It's late. We want to get the information out there. According to Ukraine, of course, Ukraine is among the top 3 countries in the world producing drones. According to Secretary Danilov, it is possible to establish the production of high-quality drones. Today, our partners are contacting us and studying the equipment produced by our private companies. They're getting live data on how drones are being effective on the battlefield. One of the bridges that was destroyed as a result of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant explosion has been restored. They've been able to put it back together over the Inhilets River and put it back into operation. This is a 72-meter long bridge and built within 5 months. That's a pretty smoking speed there. And really pretty impressive that they've managed to get the resources together to get this bridge back into operation. Now, I do see a comment here. Stephen, thank you very much for joining me. Those strategic bombing campaigns were during an existential world war. This is clearly not. I think that Ukrainians would believe that this is pretty existential for them. Russia, maybe not so much. And that's the reason why I'm not convinced that this will cause a collapse of Russia at this point. All right, let's go ahead and move on. News out of Russia. Now, this is from earlier today. They've actually restored some of this power by now, but there were power outages in Simferopol, Feodosia, Zankoy, and Saki, along with other parts of Crimea. It's indicating that Russia is having some real problems keeping their power supply up and operational. And there were also problems over in mainland Russia as well. So power problems, heating problems. There's a lot of infrastructure there that is aging and falling apart, and it's really starting to take a toll on the country. A floating crane has been installing additional boom barriers in Sevastopol's Strelsky Bay. Interesting that they are putting this effort in to add additional fortifications to Sevastopol. Not sure how effective it's going to be, because remember, you got to be able to run warships in and out of that location, but we'll see. A Ukrainian intelligence official reported that Russian forces lack the necessary operational reserves to conduct simultaneous offensive efforts in more than one direction in Ukraine. And what we've been seeing is that even though a lot of the attacking they're doing has been spread across the front lines, even when they've focused in some of their efforts, the attacks are relatively small scale, squads or small groups of men, maybe an armored tank or a BMP that are being used to attack, and they do wave after wave after wave. That's not an effective way to carry this out. So that's the biggest problem there. More like, Steven says, more like Contra attacks aimed at increasing insurance costs for Sandinista. It's a good example, absolutely. These types of attacks do raise the cost of doing business in Russia. The question is, are the people of Russia likely to see it in this way? I will leave that to better experts on Russia itself. More information that things pointing that Russia has a specific set of goals that they want, and one of them is to not have a Ukrainian state. Russian Security Council Deputy Chairperson Dmitry Medvedev reiterated on January 17th that the elimination of Ukrainian statehood and independence remains one of Russia's core war aims. There is no ifs, ands, or buts on this. If they don't meet this war aim, they will not consider it that they will have won this war. And that's one of their main goals. So when they tell you what they believe, it's best to believe them. That's really what they want. They want Ukraine to not exist anymore. Hi, Robert. Glad to have you on board. Thank you for joining me tonight. It is late, but I'm hoping to get things moving along here pretty quick. We'll have a kind of a shorter one today, so I think we'll be able to get it along right good fast. The Central Bank of Russia has increased its interest rate by 1% to 16%. This is they had a base rate of about 6.5% during July 2023. So things have not been working very well for them. This is a lower rise than some of the previous ones, but Russia's inflation is causing additional acceleration overall. Russia's continued invasion of Ukraine is highly likely to negatively impact the outlook for the Russian economy. Imports have risen faster than exports, likely contributing to the ruble depreciating since the start of the war. Basically, Russia's stripping other parts of its economy in order to inflict the war damage on Ukraine. Interesting little bit of information. Somebody went through the ORCID database and did a few calculations. Now, the ORCID database has information on 20 million scientists around the world. Before the war, registration in that database was mandatory for scientific workers in Russia. Now, 600 of those scientists have exchanged Russian universities for foreign ones. 900 changed countries but did not indicate a new place of work. At the same time, the majority have entered the current data within a year after dismissal. This means that if the current trend continues, the total number of people who have severed ties with Russia is, in fact, about 2,500 scientists. This is the brain drain. The problem that Russia's facing is that people with the skills and abilities don't want to stick around. They want to be in peaceful places where they can do excellent research without getting in the middle of drafted for a war. So if you're being sworn in as a citizen of Russia, well, you better watch out, because the Russian, basically, they're going to take you straight from there to join the military immediately if you are in their enlistment ranges. Representatives of the military registration and enlistment offices of St. Petersburg and the region present at the event handed them summonses at the solemn oath ceremony for registration for military service in order to fulfill the civic duty of military service. Earlier today, they announced, they call it the carpet plan. I imagine that's actually a bad translation. Basically, no flights in or out of the major airports, in this case, Vnukovo, because they believed that there were a high possibility of drone attacks. Now, there were some drone attacks today, but overall, that's the situation that they had earlier today. They've since resumed normal operations. There were no attacks on Moscow that they could report. They're going to raise the Novocherkassk off the bottom of the Feodosia port. That's not to restore it to service. It's not going to be coming back to service. It's been destroyed. But they are going to be going through and trying to recover the bodies of those who died in this attack. They expect it'll take 3 months, during which they'll have to carefully cut up the ship itself and discover the remains of the servicemen inside and compare them to DNA samples taken from their relatives. This one caught my eye. A P-35 missile was shot down over Ukraine. This missile was produced in the 1960s, and this marks its first known use in battle. Quite interesting, and it makes me wonder exactly how much of a stockpile of aging weapons Russia is starting to pull out and put into service. Things that they probably hoped they would never, ever have to actually use. Over in Belgorod, an electrical substation went up in flames. Some people call it a rave because of the flashing lights that was going on, and it did knock out power in part of the town. The soldiers in Russia have noticed that the drones that they've been receiving have been, while the numbers have been increasing, the quality has been dropping badly. There's no innovation, and there's no innovation because of a heavily centralized production process that does not allow for rapid prototyping and engaging in changes that might improve the drones. Now, Russia has done a lot of changes to the Shahed drones that they're manufacturing themselves, though mostly in the areas of lightening them up and using different materials, but overall staying with the exact same base drone. And from Igor Sushko, Wagner PMC mercenaries uncovered a giant drug trafficking ring originating out of the defense ministry. and out of the FSB in Moscow when they caught one of their own with drugs and had him lead him to the dealer, and so on up the chain. In response, now they reported this situation to the FSB, thinking the FSB would actually deal with the problem, would actually take care of the drug, dealing. Instead, Moscow sent special operations and Spetsnaz to hunt down this group of Wagner mercenaries. The Wagner mercenaries then said that they'll fight to the death because they were expecting the Ministry of Defense to solve the problem by taking care of the drugs, not by taking care of the whistleblowers that pointed it out. They have put out a video asking for help and asking for publication of the information. Interesting, very interesting. This is just information from the shoot down of the A-50 airborne early warning and control aircraft from the 14th of January. They mentioned, the reason I'm bringing this up is because they mentioned the Russian Air Force possesses 8 of these airframes, which might be able to cover the immediate operational impact, but that will increase the number of hours that are being put on the airframes and result in a shorter life of those vehicles. Plus, it will also put a lot more hours and exhaust the crews that have to fill in for the now missing crews and aircraft. Just an interesting follow-up there. I'm going to go ahead and move on to international stuff. I am watching for your questions and comments. I do appreciate, Stephen, your comments, and it always helps to have some additional information around. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on to the international front real quick here. And please feel free to comment and chime in as you get the information as well. The French ambassador to Moscow has been summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry. This was because Russia destroyed a hotel in Kharkiv, claiming it was a deployment point for foreign fighters, especially a couple dozen French fighters. So now Russia's making up things, bombing civilian targets, claiming that they're actually mercenaries in there and that they were French, and now demanding the French come and answer for something they made up out of whole cloth. NATO CMC Bauer says the Swedish Commander-in-Chief, Mikael Biden, was right to warn his citizens to prepare for war. He emphasized even countries inside the alliance need to adopt the Nordic whole-of-society approach. It's not a given that we are in peace, he says. Europe has had a long run of basically peaceful conditions. Maybe they can bring croissants. The French, that would be entertaining there. Thank you, Robert. The idea that Europe will be in peace. After World War II, even with the tensions of the Cold War and a few other incidents that changed some of the boundaries over there, by and large, it's been peaceful. The big nations have not been in the middle of a war or taking each other's territory for a long time. It's unusual in our modern era compared to, say, the 1900s and 1800s, where there was all kinds of things changing constantly over there through military action. So this idea that peace is a given now, it's not true. And in that same vein, he maintains that Russia is not prevailing in Ukraine, detailing the gains for Kyiv. He says all military chiefs meeting at NATO this week have pledged ongoing support. This is not charity, he says, because they're actually providing for their common defense in Europe. By stopping Russia in Ukraine, they prevent Russia from causing more chaos in actual NATO countries. And eventually, Ukraine's going to join NATO. Poland has extended the protection for Ukrainian refugees until 2025. Nice of them. Norway has allocated $190 million to boost defense production for their own needs and for Ukraine. A lot of that is going to artillery shells, and that's kind of one of the vital components that is most needed in order for Ukraine to be able to successfully push the Russians back, at least as things stand right now. A little bit of information out of the United States. President Biden has made concessions on immigration policy to Senate Republicans in order to secure backing for Ukraine aid, according to the Wall Street Journal. Personal opinion, it should stand on its own 2 feet. There should be no deals in this regard for it. Yes, I think the U.S. needs to deal with their border situation and get it under control, because right now it is absurdly out of control. But in the end, Ukraine's needs stand alone. Our internal needs do not come into that equation. Ukraine aid actually, by and large, pays people's paychecks in the defense industry. It doesn't go to Ukraine, at least in the sense of pallets of cash. It goes as military hardware. So tying the two together has never made sense to me. But then again, even though I've been following politics for a very long time, it's clear that my idea of what should be done is very different than what our politicians think should be done. European Parliament backs a resolution calling for suspending Hungary's EU voting rights. Old Viktor Orban over in Hungary has finally pushed too far. He's been blocking Ukraine aid. He's been demanding effectively bribes from the European Union for him to not block that aid. It's clear that overall he's been working either for Russia or using it as an excuse to enrich his own pocketbook, opportunities for bribes and graft. The fact that the European Union has paid a few I think it was a bad move. They should have insisted he get on board or move along, and then done this sooner. But I'm not going to get into European politics, because while I know quite a bit about U.S. politics, and I agree with Stephen there on his comment on trading border policy for Ukraine aid demonstrates that the GOP is soft on Russia, I agree with that. I don't know European politics as well, and therefore I try and avoid extensively commenting on them. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, I'm sure I'm butchering that name, so I apologize. We should help Ukraine with all the means and equipment that we have, because this is the way that Ukraine can really push back the aggressor. Exactly. I mean, you don't tie a guy's hand behind his back and tell him he's got to get into a knife fight with a group of thugs. Romanian farmers and truckers are now blocking a crossing on the Ukraine border. I've not seen any information on exactly what Romania's beef is, but we'll be watching this one, see if we can get some more information. David Cameron has compared the situation in Europe to the 1930s and warning against appeasement. And if you really look at it, and you look at it carefully, and you compare it to the years just before World War II really took off in full force, that's exactly what we're seeing now. We have a dictator country that has invaded its neighbors. It says it has a cause for it. It claims it has no desires to go beyond that. If you'll just give us this country, we will absolutely have no further reason to invade the next country or the next country. And yet that's what happened with Germany in the 1930s. Oh, well, okay, you've marched into Poland. Okay, well, I guess we're going to ignore that for now. You've marched into Belgium. Oh, we're going to ignore that for now. You can take that, but no more. You just got to stop there. You've marched into the next country and the next country, and then finally, they realized there was no stopping them unless they actually put it out there and actually moved on stopping this people, stopping the Germans. And that same situation is playing out in the same echoes and the same notes in modern day Ukraine and Europe. Appeasement doesn't work. It didn't work in World War II. It's never worked. Stop it. NATO is going to mobilize 90,000 soldiers to take part in the largest exercise conducted by the alliance since the end of the Cold War. That's big because 90,000 troops, while it might pale in comparison to 462,000 that Russia currently has in Ukraine, we haven't put this many soldiers together for an exercise in a very long time. Europe is recognizing that there is real trouble here. And they've got to get their militaries in order and together and working as a consistent, capable fighting force so that there's none of this whole bickering back and forth about who's in charge of what. They know what they'll have to deal with. So that's pretty big news to me. Moldova's Chisinau airport has received a new code, RMO, from KIV. KIV was basically resembled the Russian name of Kishinev, so they wanted to get it into something that's more appropriate for Moldova. Countries are basically throwing off the forced history of Russia. They're saying, no, we do not wish to be part of the Ruski Mir, the Russian world. We want to be our own selves. We want freedom. We want the ability to make our own future. Moldova is stepping in that same vein. More on the Romanian farmers there. The former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO in Europe, General Philip Breedlove, is calling on the West to help Ukraine strike at Crimea. He is quoted by The Hill stating, "If we give Ukraine the opportunity to strike at Crimea, Russia will be forced to rethink its position there. Hit the Russian forces all at once, hit them multiple times, and take them out piece by piece." Crimea is really the linchpin to this whole situation. The fact that Russia holds Crimea is a major strategic advantage for them. And the more untenable Crimea is, the harder it's going to be to justify holding that territory, especially knowing that it's not their territory. They'll claim it is, they will scream, they will yell, but in the end, it's not Russian territory. And the citizens of Crimea are starting to say it a lot louder than they used to. It's really interesting to see. But this is a call for the West to give Ukraine the necessary equipment to hit Crimea, hit it hard, and kick the Russians clean out of there, piece by piece if necessary, but in large waves that will actually cause true damage to Russia's ability to wage war. Chinese military experts have been looking at the Kinzhal missile, and they have found it wanting. Even though Vladimir Putin has been going, oh, this thing has no analog, it's hard to stop. And yet 1970s era Patriot missiles are taking out these Kinzhal missiles. It's clear that Russia oversold yet another one of their bits of tech. And China is saying, we're seeing this. And if ancient Western hardware is taking out your so amazing missile, maybe it's not so amazing after all. There have been a series of major GPS disruptions noted in the area around Kaliningrad. It's clear that Russia is causing a lot of jamming through that area. And the worst part is that is a serious safety issue for people in Poland, airliners and civilian aircraft, drivers and people that rely on GPS. The more they do this type of jamming, the less popular they're going to be on the world stage, and they're already pretty unpopular. France has confirmed that they will be providing the AASM Hammer bombs, 50 per month, throughout 2024. Now, I am not familiar with the Hammer bombs, so I can't speak to it too detailed, but let's see if I can find some information on it. All right, let's see. Quickly jump through here. Interoperable and modular, INS GPS, inertial navigation, GPS, infrared, or laser. So they've got a bunch of different guidance systems. So we're looking at a smart bomb that can be dropped from a properly equipped aircraft. So pretty slick. It's a extended range munition, but I don't see 70-kilometer range. 70-kilometer range. That's pretty impressive. So interesting little bit of kit. I'm going to move on to the front lines real quick here. There are a few little tidbits. Kind of zoom out a little bit here. The changes have mostly been over here near the Donetsk area. No changes over here near Kupiansk. That appears to have mostly fizzled out, though there's still plenty of fighting going on. No changes near Bakhmut to speak of for quite some time now. Avdiivka had a few little jiggles and wiggles just recently, but no major changes today. Verbova, Robotna area, this area has been still kind of... I've seen various reports and none I can rely on. And of course, Krinky here, still active, still going. No changes to speak of, at least at this point in time. Now, Deep State map does show a few little changes. Let's go ahead and grab some of them. They say that this is an advance by Russian forces in Vasily, but if you look at the overall situation, they lose a whole bunch of ground over here on the left. This looks more like a front lines clarification. The situation near Orlyanka is basically just advancing into wide open territory. And this is just, again, more of a forested area, nothing tactically significant here. I'm not going to belittle any of these changes, but just saying that none of them seem to really grab resources or capabilities that they didn't have before. The Ukrainians have reported that Russians have intensified their attacks near Avdiivka. They're trying to cut off the supply roads into the area. But that's a recent development. There's been no change in the front lines to speak of over the last few days. The ships that were in Novorossiysk, they had a whole bunch of them in there. And now very few of them are left in there. And the point that they made is that all of a sudden they're launching Caliber missiles again towards Ukraine. There was a salvo of 16 of them, and likely that's because they may have come from even just one launch vehicle, but more likely that several of these ships are out in the Black Sea trying to launch their missiles. The one change in Avdiivka area has been this industrial area. Russia had kind of captured it just the other day and have managed to expand just a little bit with some minor gains. I'm not going to sell this one short. I think this is significant and indicates that there may be issues with the defensive lines in this part of the Avdiivka front. Overall, does it really change the situation a lot? No. But if those lines are becoming untenable for Ukraine to hold, it will mean a major change. They'll have to fall back to another sustainable defensive position. And that's the front lines, kind of how it is right now. Let's go ahead and roll right into the extras for today. The U.S.-made Max Pro is being apparently very highly spoken of by Ukrainians. They're saying it saves the lives of their soldiers, and they're talking about these things deflecting anything from small arms fire to tank shells. I'm not so sold on the tank shells as being deflected by this. Maybe survived in the sense of the crew was able to bail out, or maybe it was a glancing blow. But still, they are apparently very impressed with the Max Pro armored vehicles, the MRAP vehicles here. So interesting that they're getting those kinds of top marks. And the last thing for today. This is another one of those old London Routemaster buses, and this time it's serving coffee in Kyiv. Just interesting to see these things happening and just part of the overall picture of what's going on in Europe at this point in time. And that's everything basically for today. If you have any comments or questions, go ahead and pipe in and let me know real quick here. I do appreciate you being here today, and I just want to say that the war in Ukraine is where the rubber meets the road here. This is where the forces of evil are applying pressure, trying to shatter Europe. And it's only through the effective, capable defense of Ukrainian soldiers with any piece of equipment they can get their hands on, and the support and robust support from Western nations that will hold them back and stop a potential catastrophic world war originating right there. So that's my overall thoughts for today. Thank you very much again for joining me, and I do appreciate you giving me that old thumbs up if you liked today's video and saw anything interesting or new in it. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you're not, although I suspect everybody here is already subscribed. And of course, share it with somebody if you think they could use up-to-date news on the Ukraine war. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.